Well, welcome to today's Partner Academy Live webcast. You are listening to the Time to Thrive webcast series presents Presenting at C-Level, Learn How to Close the Deal with CXOs. Welcome to the next in our monthly webcast series dedicated to helping you increase sales excellence and help your career thrive. Join us the second Wednesday of every month at 8 a.m. Pacific for a new session dedicated to improving your sales performance. You can participate on Twitter Live at hashtag TimeToThrive13. And our presenter today is Dave Underhill. So without any further delay, it is my pleasure to hand it over. Dave, you now have the floor.
Great, thanks, Deb, and welcome everybody. It's a pleasure to talk to you today. This is actually a repeat session of the presentation I did at the Worldwide Partner Conference in Toronto this year. So all you folks from Canada, it's good to chat with you again. And it was an oversold session, so we couldn't fit everybody in the room, and decided to do a repeat session for the folks that didn't. The study came up right here is Dave visits a data center. And actually in 2013, a short story here, it'll be 20 years in business for me. And up until this time, I actually had never visited a data center. So I've worked with Microsoft and Intel and HP and EMC, but I never actually had the opportunity to go into a real live data center. And a few months ago, I was working with a client that is a research center. And they were able to get me access to one of their data centers, brand new one that just opened up. And so what I was able to do is to go through the data center, get a tour, and find out a bit more about why they did it, how they put it together, and what they were going to be using the data center for. It's a cancer research center. So the bottom line was that they were going to be using it for both day-to-day and HPC capabilities. So you had SharePoint, you had Word, you had Outlook. So they're going to be using it mostly for the day-to-day capabilities, but also they do a lot of research studies where they're crunching a lot of numbers and doing a lot of analysis. So they had a remote data center that they were leasing, and after a few years as they were growing, they decided they needed to bring it all in-house. And I'll stop and apologize here for a second for some of the graphics. I did this initially in the Metro style that Microsoft is now using. It doesn't quite fit into the current version of live meetings, so there'll be a few of these graphic anomalies that you'll see, but the information is still good. So they're going to use it for day-to-day capabilities. For those of you that work in the HPC or data center world, they also have a very high, or as you might call it, very low energy usage rating called a PUE, which is a power utilization efficiency. And a score of 1.0 would mean that 100% of all the energy coming into the data center goes directly to powering computing, well, which is not possible, right? You got cooling, you got lights, etc. But at this particular client, their ratio is 1.2, which is excellent. They use a lot of passive cooling. So 83% of all the energy that comes into the data center is used for computing, which is amazing. So that was a kind of a nerd point there for those of you that are involved in that area. And as I was talking to the gentleman in the data center, he was actually attending a presentation skills course that I was doing. I asked him, how did they sell this concept, this investment of the data center to their senior executives? And I know this client very well, so I know the president, the COO, the CFO. I've worked with them, and I know them all. And I said, well, how did you sell these folks? How did you sell the executives on this? And he really mentioned that it was a couple of things. They were focused mostly on two areas of how they sold this to executives. Operational efficiency. If you think about a research center, there are a lot of different research labs. They all get their own grants. And it's typical to have each of the researchers in each of the labs almost create their own data center, get their own server, crunch their own numbers, buy their software. There's a lot of inefficiencies in how the center was managing how the work was going on within the different labs. So there's some cost to that. There were some inefficiencies. They didn't know who was buying what. People were bringing in their own laptops. You had Macs. You had PCs. So there's some operational things that they said, if we can centralize everything in our own data center, we can save some money, we can be more efficient, and we can have more control over how computing is done within our organization. So that was one selling point, and that was very specific to the COO, who was very interested in that, and also the CFO from a cost-saving basis. The strategic value really spoke to the president of the organization, because if you think about research nowadays, it's less working with test tubes in the lab, it's more about analytics, data analytics, informatics, those type of things. So having high computing power is something that's almost a necessary resource for a research institution. So the president of the organization said, we need to have this capability in order to, one, get more grant money, because the granting agencies will see that we have the ability to crunch the numbers, and two is, it'll help us in recruiting researchers and doctors to come into our center, because what we can do is say, and you can see me there, I'm standing next to a rack, we can actually give a tour to a prospective researcher, take them over to a rack and say, this is your rack. And that would be a very strong selling point to get the researcher to come to our organization. So as they were trying to sell this to senior management, they really tailored the messaging and they tailored the selling points to the president, strategic value, and to the CFO and COO more on the operational efficiencies that would come from building out this data center. So it was a great visit for me just from a standpoint of, one, just seeing a real life data center, and two is talking to him a little bit about how do they go about the process of getting buy-in for the multi-million-dollar investment that was necessary to build this thing out. Given that, the purpose of today's presentation really is how to close the deal. So if you have those opportunities with executive level, with the C-level, how do you close the deal when you're in that opportunity space where you've done your work and you have to come in and do your final presentation? And for me, what that really is all about is adding value. It's showing both in your communication that you communicate in a way that they understand the value that the organization will get from your proposal. The two is that, and that was some of the tagline from the presentation advertisement was, how do you tell a story with numbers? So for today, what we're going to do is talk about how do you target your presentation to executives? How do you create a compelling storyline, that story with numbers? How do you engage the audience? Because we know that executives are notorious for short attention spans. And how do you adopt what I call a service mindset, really getting in there and understanding how you can add value to that organization? So that's what we're going to have today. My goals are that you walk away with very specific tools, tips, and strategies that you can use on your next call. All right, so let's talk about how do you understand the executive mindset, but also target your content to them. Number one, you got to know their world. So depending on where you're at in your sales cycle, if we assume that we're talking about closing the deal with the executive, you probably had a number of meetings with them and with other folks within the organization. But overall, you're going to need to know their experience with you in Microsoft. So this is probably earlier in the sales cycle. The roles and decision-making process that will occur, their goals, challenges, and priorities as an organization. And I think specifically the motivations and incentives for that executive or that executive decision-making group. And I think this is one chunk that gets left out as far as the research and finding out about a customer or a prospect. It's pretty easy to find the other information out. But the motivations and incentives of the specific executives really play a key role in finding out what's important to them and what are the proof points that you need to get across in your presentation. And lastly is how do they view IT? Now that is how they view IT both within their organization, so how do they see a cost center, do they see it as a strategic asset, but also how do they view IT in a way that how does their company use IT to actually serve their customers? So how can they use it to be operational efficiency, be more effective in serving their own customers? So the key here to start out with is obviously to know their world, know the executive and what's important to them, in a sense what's going on for them on a day-to-day basis, and then how your proposal helps them to meet their challenges, accomplish their goals, take care of their priorities. So I think that's understood for everybody. The key is, how do you find that out? How do you know where to find this type of information? And I would look at it really in 4 buckets. One is your general media, which is online but also print media, social media, corporate sources if it's publicly held, and also your own personal network, your own personal ability to gather information about that particular customer and that particular organization, their structure, and the executives themselves on an individual basis. So as I go through the slide, if you have ideas and tips for other folks, ways that you gather information, go ahead and send them in to Deb. And Deb, after we go through these next 2 slides, I'll kind of ask you to see if we've got anything that pops up, tips from people that are on the line.
Sure, no problem.
All right, so let's take a look here. If you are trying to find out information about a senior executive, on the media side, you've got, obviously, Wall Street Journal is top of mind for everybody. That could be either print, could be industry publications, could be your local business publications, especially if it's a privately held company. I'm based in Portland, Oregon, and so the Portland Business Journal does a very good job of keeping people up to date, their readership up to date on privately held companies in the Portland area. So it's not just the Nikes and the U.S. banks and the other big, large, publicly held companies like Standard Insurance, but it's a lot of the smaller companies that you can get a lot of good information from your local press. So think about the media for one. Number 2, LinkedIn on the social side is a great tool. I do a lot of work with the Microsoft Enterprise Architects. Again, they're working in the large corporate accounts. And oftentimes they're going in fresh on sales calls or making contacts. And we talk a lot about using social media to find out as much as you can about the executives that they're going to go meet and engage with. And I had a great example. LinkedIn is one, Facebook is another, and YouTube. And I had a great experience a few months ago where I was going back and forth in email with an executive I was trying to get in touch with. And I was doing my research, so I was on YouTube, and I pinged in his name, so to speak, and found a video of him at a press conference at a gaming conference. And it was just good to see who he was, listen to what he was saying. And right as I was doing that, just right after I finished viewing that video, he called me on the phone because we were going back and forth. And I just said, Chris, you'd be amazed. I just finished watching you at your press conference at the gaming conference. And he's going, wow. I asked him a few questions. And it just, the whole tone of our relationship and conversation from then on out was almost at a peer-to-peer basis because he really values they took the time to do a little bit of research, to know his business, and to be able to ask some very specific questions about his business, his goals, et cetera, based on that press conference. So use social media to find out information about executives. On the corporate side, there's a picture there of the Form 10K. So you can go onto any publicly held company's website, I think we all know this, and go to the investor relations side of things, and you'll see press briefings, you'll see analyst briefings, you'll see the president's message, you'll see a Form 10K, you'll see proxy statements, annual reports, lots of information on there that will give you insights, I think specifically on the executives, but I think even more importantly, is the information on corporate strategy. And you'll find, especially in proxy statements, you'll find them really talking in some detail about where the company is heading, what some of their challenges and problems are. And so the key here in gathering all this information is to make sure that you can link what you're doing with the goals and the priorities and the challenges of the organization. And on the personal side, you can see in the bottom right there, you've actually got an opportunity with your own network of people in your company that have done work for this organization. I might know this person. You've got vendors. You've got customers of this organization. So tap into your own personal network that can give you information and insights that might not be in the public domain. So pulling all these 4 sources together can really give you a very clear picture of both the organization, their challenges, and the executives themselves. So before we push to the next slide, if you have any tips or ideas that fall into these categories, go ahead and send them into Deb, and we'll take a look after we finish the next slide. All right, so the purpose of all this is to connect what you're doing to their organization's goals. So if you take a look here on the left, you've got your project, what you're working on, and again, depending on where you're at in the sales cycle, this could be the project that you're still formulating and you're finding out what their goals are and their objectives. And especially when you come back in for your final presentation where you are trying to close the deal, there's got to be a very clear and easy to follow flow from your project to group objectives to corporate goals. So there's a reason to get that information on the executives in the organization, because when you come in with your presentation, one of the ways you close the deal is if the executive sees a very direct line between the money they're investing and what you're proposing to the results for their organization, whether it be a group objective or a corporate goal. Let's take a look at an example. So what you might find at the corporate level is they have an initiative to drive revenue growth from existing customer base. And that could be something as simple as, I think we've all heard the term share of wallet, where this organization might have a number of customers, but the customer may be buying one or two products or one or two services from your company. And so what they want to do for their customers is really grow that share of wallet. In order to do that, they believe they have to have deeper customer insight so they can cross-sell in those areas that are appropriate and identify opportunities, which then means that your project for a CRM solution that consolidates multiple databases, et cetera, really will tie into, and let's go back here actually, right? It really will tie into their corporate objectives. So let's go back there. We had a build that got lost. Right, so what you want to do is, if you take a look here, is if you connected those three, the revenue growth, the deep customer insight, and the CRM solution, all those things should be connected in your presentation. So before we move on, Deb, any emails or insights from folks about other ways that they gather information?
Nothing at this point.
Okay, that's great. So I think those are pretty clear buckets, right? You got the social media, you got the general media, corporate, and your own personal network. Draw on that so you can make this connection between your project, the group objectives, and the corporate goals. That's information about the overall organization and in general about the individual. One thing that's very helpful is to also have an understanding of communication styles. And I know a number of folks, especially if you're in sales or pre-sales or even in marketing, we've all taken these different personality assessments that talk about whether you're an extrovert, introvert, whether you're a big picture person or a detailed person. And I think both from a standpoint of understanding the executive, but also understanding yourself, I think it's an important part of closing the deal, because you can have good information. And what we'll go through here is what you'll find is that people who have different styles of communication are looking for different types of information. There's different priorities they have and different things they want to hear in your presentation. So you've got your driver, sociable influencer, amiable, steady, conscientious, analytical, and we'll go through each of those here in a second. So on the driver side, these are your entrepreneurs, CEOs, very direct, very assertive, action-oriented, and very much risk-takers. If you can show them a good ROI, they are willing to take risks. They're moving forward, they talk fast, they're moving fast, short attention span. And the other thing is that they really like to be in control of the decision-making process. So if you find yourself also in the dominant driver role, want to be in control, you're going to have to let up some control when dealing with someone who has that same style that you do. So provide options, let them decide. So they like to be in control of that decision-making process. And when they did this in Toronto, people asked, well, what are the clues and the cues that you can pick up to let you know what style a person is? And I think you'll see a little bit there here on this slide, which is they're very direct in their communication. They get to the point first. There's no socializing at the start of the visit. They talk fast, they move fast. They're very assertive in how they communicate. So that gives you a clue there. So that might be one style of executive that you would run into. And very typical because they are going to be in that CEO and entrepreneur mode, even the smaller organization, entrepreneurship, or the larger organization. Sociable influencers. These are very animated, they're outgoing. They're driven by the big picture vision for their organization. You'll also find executives in this quadrant, so to speak. They are going to be the very enthusiastic drivers of the big picture or the big bet or the big win. And so they are focused on people. They are very enthusiastic. And so when you go in and present to them, they're going to be looking for your passion, your enthusiasm. They're also going to be looking for ideas on implementation, like who needs to be involved, but don't go into too much detail. So as you're presenting, typical questions that would come from them would be, have you talked to so-and-so in operations? Did you cover this, or did you double-check this with another group? So they're going to want to know that you have, in your due diligence in the sales process, you've talked to all the different stakeholders in the company that are going to be necessary to have on board in order to move the project forward. So it's great to show for the driver, the ROI. These folks, in a sense, are going to want to know where is this going? What's the vision we're going to be able to accomplish with this project? How does this tie into the big picture? It's going to be really important to them. But also, on the people side, they're going to want to know, have you talked to all the interested stakeholders and parties that are going to be necessary to implement? So again, they're going to be very enthusiastic, very extroverted, and so if you tend to be more of an analytical, quiet person yourself, doesn't mean you need to have a personality change. What it means is that you're going to need to show your passion and enthusiasm for what this project can do for the company and for that executive. All right. On the amiable and steady side, this person's very calm. They listen well, somewhat conflict averse and wary of change and risk. You might find them more, not in the executive suite, but they're going to be more in the support roles. So even though you might be presenting at the end to the executives, as you're working through the organization, you'll be running into folks that have this profile of being risk averse. They want to know about support and service, conditions of satisfaction, how you're going to manage the change process. So as you can see, they're going to want to know step by step what's going to happen, and then also the impact on people. So the amiable, steady person is going to be calm, probably quieter, not going to be very comfortable with the conflict or big change. You're going to need to walk them through in baby steps, so to speak. And then in conscientious analytical, and you're going to find folks on the IT side, they're very well organized. On the finance side, anything where you're doing a lot of analysis, data crunching, they're focusing on logic, order, accuracy of your numbers. So if you're telling them that you're going to deliver, certain efficiencies, they're going to be looking for, did you make your case? Is there a logic behind your argument? They're going to look at track record. Who have you done this before? What is your proof? So this is where customer testimonials, some examples, some case studies, that can be really helpful in your presentation. You might find a CIO, CTO, maybe even a CFO in this bucket. And so if they're involved in your decision-making process, really keep that in mind. So you've got these 4 styles. So you've done all your homework. You pulled your information together. You've done your social media research. You're a bit more aware now of the styles that different executives might have. The key is to understand your own style and how that can interact with someone who might be the same as you or different from you. And like I had mentioned, I'm an amiable steady. And so my big challenge when I first started my business was with the conscientious, but especially with a dominant driver. I tended to want to come in, do a little chit-chat, talked about all the people aspects of things, and it just was not on the agenda of the dominant driver. And so I was working with a guy at Nike, and, the first meeting we had is, I tried to start the chit-chat early on. He just had no part in that. He wanted to get down to business. I was doing some coaching with him. He just wanted to do the business first. And so what I learned is over time is that paying attention to those clues and cues are important, because what we would do in that coaching session with the Nike executives, we would get down to work right away, because that's what we want to do. He wanted to see results. Then we would do the amiable, steady chat and socializing as we'd be walking out the door. And so being able to adjust how you approach different executives with your communication is key. So what I'd like to do now, and Deb has set up a nice poll for everybody, is just get some ideas from you about what is your preferred communication style. So take a second here and do the survey, and we'll get a sense of who we've got online.
So, Dave, you sure you're not an influencer?
I'm that also, but predominantly I'm an amiable steady. I just have a lot of passion around training and helping people succeed.
Oh, God.
And so that's where the sociable influencer comes in. Okay, so we've got a sales group here. So we've got, as you might imagine, a good mix. This is perfect, right? We're here on Time to Thrive. We've got a perfect mix of sociable influencer sales folks, but also conscientious, analytical, technical people. And so I think one of the key roles when you talk about technical pre-sales is you've got to have the ability to do both of those things. So the key here is for yourself is, one, be aware of what your preferred mode of communication is, because that's how you're going to put together your presentation, and those are the type of things that you're going to think are important. But realize that you're 1 out of 4, and especially when you're doing the dominant driver and sociable influencer, if that's not your area, make sure that you're covering the type of information that's important to them, whether it be ROI, whether it be vision, whether it be implementation, whether it be logic. Make sure you're covering all those bases as you put your presentation together and as you're communicating the proof points for your proposal. All right, so this is the first chunk of the presentation, knowing the executive audience, making sure you've got good information, you understand communication styles. I want to do just a short pause here and just to see if there's any questions that you have about this particular segment as we'll be moving on from here. So, Deb, we'll kind of wait a few seconds to see if anything pops up.
Sure, no problem.
We actually had a shift. We had some people shift. We had some people shift from conscientious analytical over to sociable influencer. That's okay. Again, it's not a one size fits all. It's not that you're one or the other. We all are a mix, but we have a preferred or predominant style communication. All right, no questions, no worries. Let's move on. So next is creating a compelling storyline. So what we've talked about here is, so far, you're gathering good information, both in your sales process and your research. You're aware of communication styles. So now let's take a look and say, all right, how do I put together my presentation? How do I make a compelling case for the project that I'm proposing? And so first off is know what executives expect from a presentation. So I've been doing a lot of work at Intel, Microsoft, more larger corporate clients. And at Intel, I'm doing a lot of work with kind of mid to senior level managers who have to present to their MCM or management committee members. And so I've done a lot of interviewing, and I've asked these executives, what do you expect from a presentation? What are you seeing? What are you not seeing? And so this boils it down to, this isn't just Intel, but this is pretty much across the board for executives. What they expect from a presentation is, one, that you come in and you set the context and the purpose of the presentation. Why are we here? Now, you might say to yourself, oh, come on, they know why we're here. We're here because I've got a proposal. But you have to remember that when you're coming into an executive meeting, and maybe it's a half an hour, maybe at most it's an hour to do your presentation, they have had 40 or 50 other conversations, decisions, people they've met with, both before and after your presentation and your meeting. So when you come in, right from the get-go, just remind them why we're here, what the purpose of the presentation is, and what you want from them. Is it an action step? Is it an approval? Is it feedback? So that's key number one, because if you don't do that, they'll be tuning out because they don't know where to fit you in to what's going on in their mind. 2, provide information that helps them decide. So again, since they've got so many issues they're dealing with, they're looking to you as their trusted advisor, so to speak, to give them information that helps them make the right decision on this technology, on this initiative, on this project, or these options. They might be looking at you and competitors. You might be presenting them 2 to 3 options. So put yourself in their shoes again, their challenges, their priorities, their goals and motivation, and think to give them the information they need to make an informed decision. 3, just like we talked about earlier, tie your initiatives to their goals. So it's got to be very clear to them that they get a trail between the money they're investing in your project, to the results at the group level, to the achievement of goals and priorities for the organization. It's got to be really clear. Don't make them work for it. Be clear with your ask. What do you want from them? You'll talk about that at the beginning, but you'll come back at the end. And then deliver with conviction. Whether it's a driver or a socializer or whatever, show your passion, that you've done your work, deliver with confidence and conviction. This is what's expected from executives when you come in and present. Next step, you've done all your research, got your information, create a story structure. This is what we talked about just in the last slide. Why are we here today? If this is a final proposal, you've done all your research, you've talked to people in the organization, this is the go or no-go presentation, think about it chronologically. Where are we starting? Give them some very quick background on where do we start, why are we actually even looking at this particular proposal? Where do we start? What are we proposing? What are the results that are expected? And the key here is, again, tying them back to metrics and measures that are important to that executive and that organization. And finally, why should we approve this? What are the benefits? What are the proof points? The value proposition. So here's the general story structure. Let's talk about a specific story with numbers. And what you're trying to do here is create that story using your numbers that connects the purpose of the presentation to the starting metrics, right? What were the problems or the goals that the organization had that really prompted them to take a look at your solution? What's the work you're proposing, the results that are expected, right? These are all numbers, and the reason for the next step. And an example of that, let's just talk through an example, is it might be with maybe it's a fast-growing organization. They've been buying servers just to meet their data crunching demands. But at least they have just this warehouse of servers, right? There hasn't been a lot of rationale behind it. They've got, individual servers are not working at capacity. There's no virtualization going on. They've just been buying servers as fast as they can because they're going really fast. So you've been doing some work with them. You come in for your final presentation, and really the overall purpose is to select the best option to actually help the organization, in this case, deal with a lot of their capital expenditure challenges. So you might find that their big problem in working with executives is that their CapEx expenses are going up $55,000 a year on an ongoing basis, year over year. And so you might find from your research, both online, but also in talking to people, that priority number one is get CapEx under control. Right? That's it. So that's your starting metric. Right? There's your goal and priority. So operational efficiency and cost efficiency, cost savings might be those higher level corporate goals. So the work that you're proposing could be around private cloud. You've got a number of different ways. Could be private cloud. Maybe there's a hybrid option that you're talking about also. So the starting metric is, hey, here's the challenge that the organization is facing. Here's the work you're proposing. The results expected are that over 3 years, you estimate a savings of $250,000. Now, again, these numbers need to come from your discussions with people within the organization, data center manager, IT director, CIO, whoever it might happen to be, but very specific results that are tied to the work that you're doing. So if you're saving $250,000 a year, that ties directly back into operational efficiency. You also might find that a second level priority for this organization is, since they're growing so fast, that they realize that they need to have better handle on who their customers are, what the customers are purchasing, the usage patterns, and that they're going to drive the next level of growth by really managing their customer relationships better. You must be able to say a second priority is that save $250,000 a year, you'll be able to take some of that money and invest it in a CRM system that will drive growth for them. So all those things are tied together, and the next step really is going to be around, perhaps you've got phase one. You've got a project that, again, over 3 years, the approval or the ask for this particular presentation is approve phase one. And the key here is that these things need to all tie together. There's going to be a very direct line between where we started and the metrics, the work that you're proposing, the results expected, and it should all tie together from your project to, group goals back up to organizational goals. Now, another quick example is I was working with, again, the enterprise architects at Microsoft, and they were engaging with a very large city in the U.S., and the mayor had just been elected, and her platform really came around two things. One is saving money. There have been a lot of cost overruns, especially on IT projects. The city government was running a deficit, and that the citizens felt disconnected from city government. There wasn't an easy way to interact with city government. So the mayor's vision was really to transform how the city uses technology to engage its citizens and to do it in a way that was fiscally responsible. So there's the purpose of the presentation is to talk about how to use IT to transform. The starting metric was there was a budget shortfall of $85 million. Some of that was IT related, some of that was IT support and OpEx related. So the mayor said, we are not going to run a deficit anymore. The work proposed was some consolidation, is to do a true up and to find out, okay, what have they bought? What have they deployed? Where have they deployed it? Et cetera. So there wasn't that sense of we know where everything is at and who's bought what and what licenses we have. So there's really a proposal in place initially to do some consolidation that they believe would save this city government $550,000 in the first year just on licensing, knowing what they have, what they've deployed, basic true-up type of information. And that they'll be able to save $3 to $4 million over 3 years by centralizing, not having as much overtime, not having this shadow IT where people are out there running their own mini IT departments because central IT is not providing good service. And by consolidating, saving money, they're able to reinvest in some technologies, right, some things that will help them connect with their citizens. So the next step on this one is to approve the plan. And again, you've got to have that connection. Connect the story from big picture down to your project. All right, once we've got that, we have a structure in place. Whether you've got a driver personality or a conscious analytical, we've got to keep people engaged in the presentation. And at the executive level, that can be a challenge. So how do we do that? First off, be concise with your opening. That's where, what executives expect. That was number one, setting that context and the purpose. So one thing that you can do is, as you're putting your presentation together, is to make sure that they know, in a sense, why are we here? What's the purpose of this presentation? What's the agenda? What are you going to cover? And what's the message you're trying to get across? So again, the purpose is, why are we here and what you want from them? The agenda, and then the message can tie back into what's the key idea you want them to take away from the presentation. So be concise with your opening. That's one way to engage them, especially at the beginning. You get 30 to 60 seconds where they're deciding whether or not this is going to be a good use of their time. So make sure that you tell them that it's going to be. Second, when you are telling a story with numbers, make sure you're not just throwing out specific numbers about percentage of savings. Tie them to what's important to the audience. So going back to our private cloud example. So the thing with numbers is you've got the what and the so what. The what is the basic number. So moving your servers to a cloud environment will save you $250,000 over 3 years. And they go, okay, that's great. But take it a level deeper. This is how you make that connection between what you're proposing and what has value for the organization. So this saving of money is going to free up dollars for strategic projects, such as $150,000 to CRM, which, working with your salespeople and your IT people, et cetera, we estimate will deliver a return of $300K over the same time period. So as you're presenting your story with numbers, remember what and so what. And I think another thing that's really important is to think of the CXOs as risk managers and help them manage risk. They have a number of different, not just IT-related proposals coming to them, but they've got IT and sales and operational. They are portfolio managers of their funds, and they are deciding where is the best place to put my funding, who do I want to invest in. So, and there's risks for doing that. So understand their risks, their business risk, competitive. Political risks aren't necessarily the big picture political risks like we talked about from a country standpoint or a state standpoint, but internally. If it's a large organization and they make a bet on you and your project, they are taking a political risk and technical risk. So understand what risks that they are considering as they evaluate your project. Provide compelling alternatives. Each one should be distinct and viable and deliver value. So avoid giving them the sandwich approach, which is, hey, my real proposal is B, but I'm going to give them a low ball A, and C that really is so expensive they're not going to go for it. Make sure that each alternative is very distinct and will add value. Show incremental investments and success metrics. So if you have a $5 million ask or even a $750,000 ask, if it's phased out over time, show them how you're going to measure whether that investment is returning what you said it was going to return. Give them the metrics that will show whether that's happening. And finally, be open about uncertainties. And what is it that you know? What is it that you don't know? What are some of the risks that are involved? Because, again, if you go back to that statement from the earlier slide about what executives expect, they expect that you'll give them all the information that will help them make an informed decision. And it's not just a rosy scenario where everything's going to be smooth. If there are some risks involved, you build your credibility. You build that sense of being a trusted advisor by being open about the uncertainties and having a dialogue, because that's where you really become more than just a salesperson pushing technology. You become that more strategic business advisor, really working with them to make sure that the adoption of this project is successful, that the change management occurs, that they actually realize the value that they hope to get out of the investment that they're making. So as far as engaging your audience, I think those are things that have come across in my conversations with executives, which is get to the point quickly, make sure you relate the numbers to things that are important to them, but also think of them as risk managers and help them be successful in making that decision in a way that helps them drive success for their organization. All right, and finally, adopt a service mindset. And I have a short story I'll tell in just a second. But the key here is, we're all under pressure to make our numbers, and it's a challenging economic environment. So they can be very easy to slip into a very tactical standpoint, which is got to get my appointments, got to get my numbers, got to make my proposals. And I think it's really important to take a step back from it And part of what we talked about today is, and that whole research part of understanding who you're talking to, is to think of yourself, again, as that trusted advisor or someone who you're coming in to find ways and to collaborate with this prospect or collaborate with this customer and find ways to use IT to help them and their organization be successful. So to me, it's being of service to the customer or the prospect. And, some key points of that is know what's important to them, focus on their success, and be ready to have a dialogue. So be open with the risk. Talk to them about their challenges and have that conversation back and forth. Even in that final presentation, I think it's important to keep in mind that as maybe anxious as you are about making this pitch, if it's a big ticket project you're working on, those executives are just as anxious about making sure they are making the right decision and investing the money in the right spot. So real quick story, also about a CXO presentation, but in a different sense. You kind of see a picture of a barn and a cell phone tower. I was working with a company a few years ago, and they had a contract with Verizon and T-Mobile to actually find land and to build cell phone towers. Right? So they were contracted out to do that. We were working with the business development folks who actually would go out and talk to property owners and to approach them about siting a cell phone tower on the property. And we talked about being of service. And one of the salespeople told a story. And basically the story was, he was going out into kind of a rural, but somewhat of an urban rural area near Seattle. And he was needed to talk to a property owner, a farmer, who had a prime location just outside of the Seattle metropolitan area. And they really wanted to get this location for a cell phone tower. And so he drove out there one day, kind of went up, knocked on the door. The farmer wasn't at the house. The person said he's over in the barn. So he walked over to the barn, introduced himself, and immediately the farmer was as angry and says, "Oh, another one of you guys. We've had half a dozen different people coming out here wanting to get our property to build a cell phone tower. I'm too busy. I don't have time to talk to you guys. Go away. I'm too busy right now." And the guy tells the story. He says, the business development guy from the company stopped and said, "Well, what are you busy with?" The farmer goes, "Well, what do you mean?" He goes, "Well, what's on your plate for today? What are you busy with?" He goes, "Well, I've got to get these things unloaded. I've got to get my trucks and the tractors washed. Just a number of different things. I don't have time to talk to you." And the business development guy goes, "Well, I'd be glad to help out. What do you need some help with?" And the farmer was just taken aback and said, "Well, I need someone to kind of wash the tractor and wash the trucks here." Business development guy says, "I'll help out. Show me what to do." So he took him over, gave him the bucket, gave him the hose. The business development guy washes the truck. He washes the tractor. He comes back in, kind of, he doesn't have a suit on, but he has professional business clothes on. He's kind of wet and dirty. And goes back to the farmer and says, "We're done with that. Anything else?" And the farmer goes, just shaking his head and goes, No, we're good. Thank you for your help." And then farmer pauses and goes, "Why don't we take some time to talk? Why don't you stay for dinner once I finish some chores here, and we'll talk a little bit more about what it is you're here to talk to me about." So they went in, they had dinner, had a discussion around what the business development guy was proposing for the cell tower. The farmer was open to it and said, "Hey, come back tomorrow with a contract and we'll talk about it some more." And came back the next day. I signed the contract. They got the cell phone tower located on the property. And to me, I was just stunned by the story that this guy told in the training, because it really was about the service mindset, which is stepping back from the transaction and paying attention to understanding what's really going on for this executive, in this case, this farm owner, and what were his problems and how you could help that person be successful. So I think as we look at ourselves in sales mode, is adopting that service mindset is really critical to landing our messages, to collaborating with our customers and prospects in a way that we can close the deal. Because I think people pick up on that. They pick up on whether you're there just to, close sale and push technology, or they also pick up and are aware of whether you're there really as that strategic advisor. So keep that service mindset front of mind. All right, as a wrap-up, in closing, use data. We talked about using data to close the deal. What that means is know the audience and the territory. What's going on? What are the priorities for the business, for the executive? Target to executive expectations. Give them information that helps them make an informed decision. Tell a story with numbers. Make sure you have that thread that goes from your project to business group objectives to overall corporate goals and vision. And finally, adopt a service mindset. So you keep these things in mind. This slide deck, again, will be available afterwards. I'll put some, based on some of the discussion that we've had here, I'll put some additional information into the speaker notes section. So you'll have this as a tool that you can use for future sales calls. And also as a wrap-up, I know we've got some folks from Canada here, so if any of you that are on the line deal with folks from different cultures and would like some information about how to be a successful global presenter, you can send me an email. I'll be glad to send you an article I recently wrote, and then you can also go on the website to find out more information. So, Deb, we're kind of a wrap for here. If we have a couple of quick questions, we can do that. But otherwise, everybody, thank you for your time. This will be archived, so you can refer to it down the road in the future.
All right. Well, thanks, Dave. I don't see anything coming into the queue, so I will head into the wrap-up process, but I'll keep my eyes peeled for it. So, folks, continue the discussion. We'd love for you to join us on our Sales Specialist group on LinkedIn after the webcast, where Dave Underhill will continue to answer your questions. And we've got the LinkedIn link there. And you can also continue the discussion on Twitter if you're interested. And with that does conclude today's event. What you're going to see coming up shortly here, this is a link to a web page which will take you to a short survey. We appreciate you taking a moment to fill this out prior to logging out. You're going to need to enter your email address to access the survey questions. And then once you're in there, our voting scale is on a scale of 1 to 5, with 1 being the worst and 5 being the best. So if you've got some great information from Dave today, or you would like to make some recommendations for the future, we would love to hear from you. After you're done recording your feedback, be sure to click on the Submit button at the bottom to ensure that feedback has been received. And with that does conclude today's Partner Academy Live webcast. All materials from today's presentation will be available internally on the Academy website within 24 hours. And partners are going to be able to access the live meeting recording in the Partner Learning Center within 24 hours as well. I'd like to extend a huge thank you to our presenter, Dave, and thank you, audience, for logging in and joining us today. You may now disconnect from the audio portion of this call.